So what is the Second Amendment? What really about? So what's it really about if it's not that old saying that everybody brings up that most people believe? Most people believe that we need guns as a last line of defense against tyranny, man. And again, that's not just the conservatives that believe that. A lot of liberals have bought into that idea, that was the idea behind the Second Amendment. It's not. So are you ready for the real history of it? We've discussed this before, but it's mind-blowing every time we bring it up. So the Second Amendment, it had two purposes. Well, actually, it largely ended up with one, but it was founded on one idea, and it moved on to mean another idea in the eyes of the founders. So the original intent was about standing armies. Thomas Jefferson knew, when he looked at history, that standing armies were always a threat to a government being stable, because standing armies had the potential to overthrow a government, and it oftentimes happened throughout history. So basically what they wanted is, when you have the soldiers, if they're not overseas fighting, when they come back home, they have to, by law, disband. The army can't stay together when they're home. So they have to, by law, disband. And when they do disband, they're allowed to form militias in their states, and they can keep weapons. Okay? So that was the first idea. The idea was that they didn't want the federal government to get overthrown. Not that they did. Not that the idea was they need guns in case they need to overthrow us. The idea was they didn't want them to get overthrown, so they made the army disband, and they were allowed to form militias and have weapons. That was what it was originally for. Then, this is amazing, we had Patrick Henry, okay, from Virginia, one of the founding fathers. He was the largest slave owner in the state of Virginia. He wrote about this, and also George Mason, same thing, from Virginia, founding father, slave owner. They went back and forth with Thomas Jefferson, and they were talking about how, look, we're afraid that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which of course is the General Welfare Clause, they were afraid that that could be interpreted to free the slaves, okay? And they were afraid about that, because Virginia is a slave state, okay? In fact, the majority of the population in Virginia were slaves. So they were scared to death of Article 1, Section 8 eventually being used to overturn slavery, which would mean that they would lose all their slaves, right? So what happened is, this is amazing, they came to an agreement, and this was the purpose of the Second Amendment. The idea was, well, look, you're allowed to, in Virginia, because Virginia was apprehensive to join the country, they said, look, you guys join the country, and here's what we'll give you. We will allow you to form militias, and you can patrol the border in Virginia to try to make sure that slaves don't escape, and you can be armed. So when they talk about a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, what they're saying is, you can do slave patrols to make sure that the slaves in Virginia don't escape north for freedom. So the main purpose of the Second Amendment, not according to me, according to the Founding Fathers, you can read speeches from Patrick Henry and George Mason on this, okay? The purpose of the amendment was to stop slaves from escaping north in Virginia. So the militias they're talking about in the Second Amendment, slave patrols. So the Second Amendment is actually for preserving slavery. Well, technically, if you want to be specific, it's also about standing armies. So it's about standing armies and preserving slavery. That is the actual purpose of the Second Amendment. Anybody who tells you it's to stop the government from getting too strong so we could overthrow them, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. That's not in the debates. Nobody mentions that in the debates among the Founding Fathers. Again, the only things brought up, standing armies and protecting slavery. That's it.